Hey Naveen, so good to see you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Shamim. Nice to see you again as well.
So, for our guest, Dr. Naveen Sikka is an allergy immunology specialist here in Frisco, Texas. And you've been practicing now how long?
Let's see, fellowship was over in 2008, so that's 16 years, I guess. My first job actually was in Minnesota. So after I graduated fellowship, one of my senior co-fellows had joined a practice in Minnesota. And right when I was about to apply for a job, he said, "We're looking for another partner to join and
Mhm.
love to have you." And so I ended up moving to St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was there for 5 years in the private practice world.
Okay.
So becoming a doctor, I think, was always something that was an internal kind of drive or passion that I've had for the longest time. I remember even as a junior high student that was just kind of like the career path I had always thought I was following. My father is an engineer, retired engineer, and my mom is a retired chemist.
Okay.
So I think it was more my dad that was really maybe a bit frustrated with the engineering profession and said, I see a lot of my colleagues or friends that are physicians that are happier and more successful. And I think that's kind of what maybe was his recommendation for me to follow that passion, that pursuit. So I grew up in the Midwest, primarily in Iowa. So small town, I guess it's small town compared to Dallas, Cedar Rapids. I had the option to go abroad, so I ended up going to India. My parents wanted me to kind of get some cultural background of where we came from, and so I ended up spending 6 years in India doing a pre-med and medical school program there, which was an amazing experience. Total cultural difference, of course, from somebody who grows up in Midwest Iowa to experience a different culture altogether in India. I saw a lot of amazing pathology, learned a lot about medicine in general. And then when I came back to this, once I graduated, I came back to the U.S. That was always my intention, of course, and got my residency in Detroit, Michigan at Henry Ford Hospital. I was kind of torn between a lot of different specialties. It ended up narrowing down to gastroenterology and allergy and immunology. And I think once I did the rotations for each, the passion fell towards allergy and immunology just because it was an amazing science that we knew nothing about or really learned limited amounts of data about during our training. So really, it was an exciting science for me, and ended up just saying yes, that's the way I want to go.
So then eventually you were employed here in Dallas by a larger group.
Yeah, so after 5 years in Minnesota, moved to Dallas for family reasons and joined a group here. Actually, it wasn't that big when I first joined. I was their third physician
Mm.
that became part of that group. And they had two locations at the time back in 2013. And since then, yeah, I think they've expanded to three locations. It was a great place to start building my career here in Dallas.
Yeah, so tell me how is that type of practice? I'm in emergency medicine. I'm employed by a large group that then contracts with hospitals.
So I don't have a lot of corporate experience in corporate medicine. I guess the only experience I had was residency. So I do think it's different. I think that private practice, it has a different feel. You feel a bit more close to the way the operations of the clinic run, so the administrative duties are a bit more hands-on. Even if you're not an owner of the practice, even as an employed physician, you'll still see the day-to-day operations of how things are functioning and can hopefully maybe suggest or intervene if your senior partner or whoever the owner is willing to entertain those suggestions. I think there's less bureaucracy as far as changing things that you may need to change as far as office protocols or medical procedure protocols compared to maybe a hospital-based or corporate medicine-based setup. So my first job in Minnesota was initially an employed agreement for 1 year. Private practice settings will consider a partnership track. And what that means is they'll give you some kind of either profit sharing agreement or actual equity in the business itself where you have an ownership stake. And then that helps incentivize you to be more productive and also stay with the group long term. There's a buy-in procedure. This can get more complicated, and there's a lot of various ways that equity partnerships are offered. But the buy-in pricing is variable. It usually is based on a lot of factors of both the fixed assets of the company as well as the accounts receivable that generate the actual value of the practice. And then from there, your portion is divided up based on how many other practice providers there are. that are sharing that ownership stake. And then you buy in typically over a period of 5 years, and usually it's not something that actually comes out of your savings, it actually comes out of your production. So really you don't see a loss to your, or like a loan that you need to pay up front. It kind of is coming out of your earned income, so you don't really see a hit financially in those first 5 years. That's just the buy-in part of it, so you then can share in the profit sharing part. So then once you are a partner, then as the buy-in is continuing to occur, whatever profits are created for the company at the end of the year will then be equally distributed based on your production performance during that year. So that's one of the perks of an equity partnership. Now, when I moved to Dallas, I was offered an employment position where I was a salaried employee, but there was also a production component to that contract. So there's an incentive that you can also offer employed physicians. It's a kind of a double benefit, right? If they have the energy to see more patients, do more procedures, et cetera, they will get a production bonus at the end of the year or quarterly, depending on how your contract is set up. And then, of course, the clinic itself, the owner will also see that benefit because you're helping generate revenue for that practice. So that's a great model as well. The benefits are that you don't have as much responsibility on the administrative front, which can be quite tedious. Sometimes the idea of being a partner like I was in the first practice may sound appealing, but there are some other responsibilities that most clinicians don't have access to or training for that may be quite a burden and then can also frustrate them and or realize that maybe that wasn't the route that was best.
So tell us what happened. What was the big turn? What made you go off
Yeah,
on your
so
own?
after 8 years of being in the employed space, what made me leave the practice to open my own private practice here in Frisco, there were some procedural offerings that I wanted to offer our patients that unfortunately were not being accommodated. That was one of the biggest things. Secondly, there's always, as I was mentioning earlier, administrative duties or administrative functions. I had suggestions of being there for many years, how we can maybe improve functions, but that's hard to do when you're not an actual owner. And so sometimes some of the functions of the clinic that I thought we could possibly improve upon were not being entertained. And so those kind of two issues were what were putting that idea in my head that maybe it's best if I pursue these opportunities on my own and then run it the way I feel fit.
And so what have you learned since you've started your own practice? Like what should we know about if any of us
Yeah, well, the first thing
want to go
I
off
tell
on our own?
we're laughing because there's always this fear factor of the unknown. I always want to first say, and I may be coming from a place that's different than some other clinicians as far as experience, first of all, because I've been in the private practice world since day one, and I'm also a specialist, which can also be a different benefit compared to say maybe a primary care physician, which has a different revenue cycle. So I first tell everybody that if you want to do it, if you want to be on your own and be your own boss, it is a possibility. Don't believe the hype that it is impossible to become a successful practitioner if you're in private practice or if you want to go solo on your own. It is always doable. The biggest hurdles, of course, and there are many, is to then know how to properly build your practice so that you don't become, significantly in debt or unprofitable because you just didn't have all your ducks in a row when you were starting out. So there's a lot of things that have to be done ahead of time. Even though I had the experience of being in the private practice world for 13 years, I had decided that I would hire a consultant, a practice consultant that has been helping individuals set up their own private practices for 25 years. And yes, there's an expense associated with that, but I think it's valuable to initially incur those expenses because they will show you what you don't know. And as we all know in medicine, we have no business training. Maybe some of us are lucky in undergraduate school that we had a business degree, but even then, medical businesses have their own unique functionalities, and so having that consultant as the initial kind of backbone will help. If you don't want to spend that money, you can do it on your own, but then you got to just make sure you know what the steps entail. biggest thing is location. You got to find a building. You got to make sure you have a reasonable rent if you're planning to rent. If you're planning to buy, make sure you have a nice loan in place. To get that loan, however, you do need a business proposal, what's known as a pro forma. And most of us don't have those accounting skills to understand what a pro forma. I had to Google it. I didn't know what a pro forma was when I first started. That was one of the things my consultants were recommending, is that we need to get you a pro forma. And I was like, okay, what the heck is that? So these are things that show you what your expenses are when you're first starting up, but also anticipate your potential profits for the next 3 years. And this is how you can then show this to the bank, and then the bank will then help you create a loan package that will allow you to become a startup business with the financial support of the bank in the initial phases, because unfortunately you will be in a bit of debt in the beginning. You can of course control that by limiting your overhead as far as finding a building with a reasonable rent and having limited staff in the beginning. Staffing is always the biggest expense for any private practice. That is always going to be your biggest expense, so you have to be careful in not hiring too many people too fast. When I first started out, all I had was my office manager, and then we worked together for about a month before I first then started hiring a front desk person and then a medical assistant. So those are the top 3 employees, but I didn't start off right away with all of them. And you want somebody who understands insurance, scheduling, reception duties, supply chain management, etc. There's a lot of, again, moving parts there that you have to be aware of. And of course, I'm talking about the insurance-based model. We didn't talk about another opportunity that's, of course, growing trend now is the direct care model. That's one option or one term that's used where you offer a cash-based service, which is another wonderful opportunity for a lot of clinicians. It just depends on your specialty and can you, of course, succeed in that approach. Initially, it was a primary care approach, but I've seen a lot of specialists now become successful in that area as well. Surgical centers now that are cash only. Usually that model is a more cost-effective model for initial setup because you can have very, very low overhead as far as a startup. You can even basically be on your own initially to help set up your practice and have very minimal overhead. Maybe just the building rent will be your only overhead and a few medical supplies based on your specialty. The insurance-based models require a lot of understanding, first of all, how that process works. And there's a delayed payment model. With cash-based services, you get paid the day you see the patient, and the money's in the bank right away. Unfortunately, with insurance-based billing, you have a minimum of a 30 to 45-day hold period before your claim is processed, and then you get money into your bank account. So that is unfortunately one of the biggest hurdles initially when you're first starting out, where you have no capital in your account, and you still have to make payroll, you still have to pay your rent, you still have to pay your utilities, you still have to pay your phone bill. And so those expenses can pile up quickly, and if you don't have your insurance payments set up correctly, making sure that you have a proper billing team in place, or if you're going to do it yourself, making sure that you have all of those ducks in a row as far as revenue cycle management in place. And that's definitely a big hurdle for a lot of newbies that are trying to open their own business, because that is probably one of the more complicated parts of the setup process.
I kind of felt like there hasn't been a lot of interest in starting your own practice. I feel like most people join large groups.
Yeah.
And I thought the reason was it wasn't really feasible to be a solo practitioner.
My take is that they incentivize you. A lot of these big groups or hospital-based systems will, of course, approach you when you're a resident or a fellow and say, hey, we have a great clinic here, or you're already working for that facility as a resident or fellow, then there is the idea of support from a big corporate entity. They are basically placed on a guaranteed salary for the first 2 years, and you get, of course, healthcare benefits and other benefits as well as being part of that setup. Thereafter, you have to then go either on a production-based model. And once the 2 years is up, you may start to realize, okay, maybe the production-based model here is not as feasible as I was expecting it to be, or there's more work, there may be more responsibilities that you were unaware of until you get into that system. Going back to private practice, the fear of the unknown and the financial burden. I think the biggest hurdle, is everybody's like, I don't know if I can afford to open my own, because they don't understand what that means. They have no training on what the financial requirements are, and you can be very lean and start very lean, and you'll get bank support with loans because they know that physicians will produce. And so banks are not afraid to give physicians money to start up their own businesses. You just have to know how to do it correctly and do it with the needs that you have as a potential business owner.
Well, it's really encouraging to hear you say that, like that it is possible and it's doable. Because honestly, I was under the impression that that's just not a thing anymore. Like it's out of style.
Yeah,
Everybody
I think it's
starts their
swinging
own
back.
practice.
Yeah, I think it was for a long time it wasn't. I think maybe the last 30 years it's been employed physician is kind of the norm. And now I think it's swinging back away from that because I think people are being unfortunately overworked or underpaid or both. Their quality of life is not what they expected. When they got into this profession, they had an idea of what medicine should be. And then when you start to get into the bureaucracy of medicine, it's a lot more than we expected to perform, whether it's just clerical tasks of charting or volume of patients that you have to see to stay successful, or requirements to be part of the administrative team, even though you didn't really want to do that.
And I thought that also one of your motivators was the private equity buyout.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So that's a big push right now. That's of course hit a lot of specialties. I think you would probably be the first to comment that it definitely hit the ER world, and that was always shocking to me that they would become two separate entities because isn't the ER function to help feed the hospital? Why would you separate that opportunity out from, make them two separate entities to then function under different administrative responsibilities? Private equity is a new thing for us, and well, it's new in the past 4 or 5 years for allergy clinics to be bought up by private equity organizations under the guise of, hey, we can help you manage your organization more efficiently, and then you can go back and become a physician without having to worry about the administrative duties. Always sounds appealing. I can testify to that, being an administrator of my practice, since I'm both the owner as well as the clinician, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be both. Initially, when you're slow in the clinical world, you can do both pretty comfortably. And I would say for the first probably year and a half, I didn't have any major burdens as far as time spent doing either of those two activities. But now, almost 3 years into my practice now, I am spending a lot of time being the administrator, and that's hurting the potential to see new patients and generate revenue for the practice. The most important thing is to help your patients and, of course, succeed financially. I think that's where people get sold on the idea that these companies, these private equity companies will come in and say, hey, we'll become your management company, or they call it the MSO, or managing service organization, and we'll help run your practice. You can give all those duties up to us. You can go back to being a clinician, and you will have a more comfortable life. Oh, by the way, though, we're going to take 51% of ownership of your practice. So that's always a red flag for me because that all of a sudden means that you've lost control of your business. And once that happens, you can never get it back. And then all of a sudden now you're back to being an employee again rather than an owner of a business. Yeah, you own 49% or whatever percentage they give you that's not controlling ownership interest. You're technically an employed physician again, so you have to follow the rules of the corporate entity that is managing your company. And inevitably, from what I've heard from feedback, and I don't have personal experience with this, just kind of more other colleagues of mine have had this experience, that most of the time, after a period of time, maybe 1, 2, or even 3 years, that physician will have regretted that sale or the share of equity, and either will quit, retire, or just suffer through it and be unhappy again with their career choice.
I think is a recurrent theme is that physicians don't want to manage. They don't want to be business owners. They don't want to deal with the administrative tasks. We're always tempted to take that easy route and just kind of, okay, if somebody can just handle it for me, I just want to be a doctor.
You have to realize that what you're giving up is not just administrative control, but your ability to have financial freedom or financial control of your business. And that's a thing that I think a lot of us don't understand, how your business will be run. And if you don't have control of that, or you don't have a say in that, then unfortunately you will inevitably be unhappy, in my opinion. It's this notion that we don't know how to do it, maybe, but we're graduate level educated professionals. We have a very unique set of skills. That the fact that we achieve that level of education and skill should also then tell us that anything is possible. We should be able to do anything else that we want to do. You just have to put the effort in. I mean, I tell people if they ask for advice is like you have to be invested in every aspect of your business. Learn to do it yourself first, or at least learn the functions of what each role require. Otherwise, it will be more challenging to be running an efficient practice.
How do we make more physicians
Yeah,
versus
it's a great point. I don't know if it's, if I can add to that, interest may be one issue, but it's also just, I think there's the fear of the unknown again. I know I've repeated that a few times throughout our talk today, but like it's just, I don't know even know where to begin.
Mhm.
And I don't even know what is an insurance verification? What is a payer contract? How do I submit a claim to the insurance company? All of those things are foreign to us because we were never taught. If you're planning to go through the insurance-based model, you have to know this stuff. Like I even took when I first joined my practice back in St. Paul, I personally took a weekend course on billing and coding. And even my three partners that I had were like, "Why are you doing that? We have a biller." And I'm like, because I want to know if I'm doing it right. If I'm selecting the right codes, and inevitably I found out that I was underbilling, and actually the whole office was underbilling. We were doing all the proper work, but we just didn't understand how to properly bill those claims. And because of those changes that I learned, I was able to help generate more revenue for the office. And again, it was just a simple weekend course. It didn't even take a lot of time to learn those things. This is where I think there's that fear of, how do I do that? I don't want to worry about that. I don't want to negotiate my contracts, or I don't even know how to begin. And this is where I say, you have to find somebody who has that experience, and hiring a consulting firm may be the best way to go if you're planning to go down the insurance-based pathway.
So did they help you negotiate those contracts and
So
credential?
thankfully, we have it in Texas, or at least in Dallas, we have what's known as an independent physician association, or IPA. And as a paying member of that organization, you then get put into a group contracted rate that they've already pre-negotiated with payers. And so that's a great way to really have minimal burden as far as getting the right rates from day one. Now, unfortunately, a lot of cities out there or other smaller towns don't have access to those IPAs.
Mm.
So in that situation, this is where a consulting firm may be beneficial because they will have contacts with each of these payers, or a credentialing organization that has the ability to negotiate on your behalf to get better rates. You want to get at least 100% of Medicare. If that's a term that people are unfamiliar with, that is what you want to aim for. Ideally, you want to get more, 105, 110, 115, 120% of Medicare. Those are the really good contracts that are out there for commercial payers. But you have to have clout or knowledge of how to approach that to get those rates. Um, some of the payers don't have memberships with IPAs. Like, for example, I think the Dallas-Fort Worth market, United Healthcare is an independent organization where you have to do it independently. But then this is where my consultant helped step in and get that for me.
Mm.
And so my work was very minimal in approaching that. And I think you have to have, that's one thing I did farm out to somebody who was an expert, because that was an area that I knew I would fail. You have to know how to navigate that setup. And if you don't have experience, then you could potentially get a terrible contract.
And still being engaged and recognizing that it's your
Oh, of
business.
course.
I think
Yeah.
that's another thing I think that's very common among physicians is we really believe in the specialists. And we have such a culture of deference towards specialists. And so I think we tend to just go, okay, well, that's the financial guy. He's going to handle that. Or that's the billing person. They're going to handle that. And we don't really like stay engaged and say, hey, I got to know this stuff too
Yeah.
in order to be, looking out for my own money in my own clinic. Like that's my business.
And you said that correctly. It is your money. And that's the thing that a lot of people forget sometimes, or maybe overlook, is that every penny that's earned from the insurance company is yours if you're in the private practice world. And then you get to decide how to spend it on your overhead, etc. But if you're not engaged in understanding how that money is being collected, then you may miss out. I outsource my billing, so my claims processing is done by an independent third-party company. You can have it in-house. You can have an in-house biller, or you can outsource it to an off-site company. And I decided to go the off-site route just because I was looking for a specific set of functions that I knew would be difficult to find with an in-house biller. And so they would initially we set up weekly meetings for about 15 to 30 minutes to just review the claims of the week and make sure everything was submitted correctly, as well as if there's any questions that need to be answered from both my side as the clinician, or if I had questions for the biller to make sure that we're billing those claims correctly. And after about a few months of calls, the owner of the company had set up a meeting with me just to kind of check in on how things were going. And he said he wanted to give me some feedback. He goes, out of all the clients we have, and they have hundreds of clients across the country, I'm the only physician that shows up repeatedly with the calls. He says, I've never seen a physician more engaged in the billing meetings than you. And I just was puzzled by that comment. I'm like, why? How? It's my bottom line. It's my revenue. Why wouldn't I not be part of that? That just seemed foreign to me that was the case. But he's like, no, you'll be surprised that most clinicians do not participate in those calls, even if they are the owner of the practice. I think I've had the luxury of being in the private practice world since day one, so I know that every dollar I generate will come back to me or will be shared with the group. And I think healthcare should be that way for the clinicians. We do provide a lot of services that are, again, unique and specialized. Doesn't matter what field you're in, and we have to be rewarded for the work we do. It's a difficult job.
What is your recommendation or advice to physicians who want to? I know you've mentioned several things.
Yeah. Obviously, first of all, I don't think it's impossible. That's the first thing I always tell everybody.
I feel better
Yeah,
about that already.
yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
it was impossible. I thought it was
I
like
want to
not a
pass on
thing
that.
people did anymore.
Yeah, I have a colleague that did the direct care route. She's a primary care physician and went the direct care route and also had those same fears, but was so fed up with the bureaucracy of corporate medicine, and just the lack of support. Yes, they'll give you that support for the first 2 years or that whatever the extent of your initial contract is when you're guaranteed a salary. Once you go on production, unfortunately, that support seems to fizzle away. And now you're considered just an employed physician, and if you don't like the way it's set up, too bad. And I think she got fed up with that whole approach and even saw a loss of revenue as far as, even though she was working harder, she wasn't able to impart any successful, meaningful change to her bottom line. But also the patient satisfaction was poor as well because for many factors, but that was just something that she was like, this is not the way medicine should be. I shouldn't have to worry about the speed of how I see my patients or the volume of patients I see every day. And I shouldn't have to nickel and dime them for every single thing that we're doing. And so in her world, she said the direct care route was a better way to go because you could spend more time with the person and you could limit the expenses that were incurred as part of that process. And then care improves, satisfaction improves. But the whole point of the story was not that only, but it's just that, she started very lean just by herself. There was no other employees. She answered her own phone. She sent her own faxes. She did her own charting. She
Sounds like me
ordered her
right
own lunch. Yeah, and it sounds
now.
like that's a lot of work, and it
Yeah.
is a lot of work, but when you own it, when it's your business, it doesn't seem like a lot. It's hard. It's like you feel good that you are doing something for yourself rather than for somebody else. And it does pay off. The first couple of years are always going to be challenging. If you're already employed and you're expecting a certain level of income, you probably will not achieve that in the first 2 to 3 years of your practice. But it will come with time as long as you're committed and dedicated. And I'll say this again, and as I kind of said it earlier, try not to give up control. Control is one of the things that is the most important as far as running your business. When you give up control to some other entity, unfortunately, that can lead to problems. And so, again, to recap, like you can do it. You just have to find the right support. There's tons of us out there that have done it. Facebook groups, just contacts in general with your local community, and then of course consultant groups out there as well that will be willing to help you. And it's for a reasonable rate. They're not going to, they're not going to take advantage of you. They know that there is a financial strain to everybody that's starting out, and so they'll make sure it's a reasonably priced.
Okay. Well, tell us about your practice.
Yeah, so for 2 years, I've been with my own group here, U.S. Allergy and Asthma. Bread and butter allergy and immunology medicine. I see all ages allergy-related disorders. And so we do the standard bread and butter allergy, allergic rhinitis, allergic conjunctivitis. Asthma care is another big one that's under our umbrella, which is sometimes unknown amongst the referring docs, that asthma is an allergic disorder in most cases and can be managed by an allergist. There, we also offer immunologic services as well. Another
part of our specialty is understanding the immune system, and we have now as offerings in the biologic space. That's kind of the new wave of medication therapy, is to block certain receptors for biologic therapy. So as an immunologist, we're trained in managing those conditions as well. And so part of my practice is also geared towards biologic infusions.
Yeah.
In Frisco, right up of 121, next to Centennial Hospital, just down the street from Centennial. I feel like we built up a nice building with a friendly atmosphere. Yeah, we look forward to see anybody that needs my services.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely link your website into wherever we post this. And then tell us, do you have a website? You want to tell
Yeah,
us the
it's just
website
US
too?
Allergy. There's usallergyandasthma.com, or just usallergyasthma.com without the and.
Thank you so much, Naveen. I learned so much from this conversation. I hope we can do it again
Absolutely.
and keep
Thanks for
seeing
the
how you
invitation.
progress in your journey.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.